Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming out to my presentation today on navigating the vulnerability landscape. We were messing around with it. We couldn't figure out how to hide the browser, so we are just going to ignore it so that we can move on. My name's Gerrit. My handle is Irish. I am an application security engineer for a mid-sized tech company based out of St. George. Beyond security, I love my family and I really love baking, and my favorite cookie is indeed HTTP only. Thank you, appreciate it. But most importantly for today's presentation, I was recently made project manager for a local company called the Big Old Damn Co. You can tell I'm qualified because they let me come here and I'm speaking. Yes, thank you, appreciate it. So using my recently acquired expertise as leading head manager of all things technical for Big Old Damn Co., I am going to present to you today a story. And through that story, we are going to learn how to navigate the vulnerability landscape easily. So jumping right into our analogy, congratulations, everyone. You are all hired. You are all now members of the Big Old Damn Co. Welcome to the family. We really value you as a member of our team. And we are going to move on with the worst thing you can hear. You are hired because we have been ignoring a problem for years and years that has grown to a point where we can no longer ignore it. That problem has to do with our dam. Now, this dam was built 10 years ago using technology that was already 20 years out of date when we built it. It is full of leaks. Some of them are big, some of them are small, and we know that people are actively using these leaks to steal water from the reservoir. That water is really critical to a small town that relies on this dam. So the question is, as a team, we are going to figure out what we should do, right? Are we going to go after the huge cracks first, or do we go after the small ones? How are we going to know what cracks there are in the dam? And do we stop the ones that people are stealing from first, or do we ignore them because they're not that big? Now, hopefully you guys have been able to draw some parallels between this and some of the issues that you're facing at your company with your different tech stacks. One of the main dilemmas that we have is that we can either wander around aimlessly and just kind of fix things as we see them, or we can use some standardized methods that other people in the industry are using and are actually feeding information to us from. And I personally prefer the latter. And so today I'm going to help us make sense of this alphabet soup of acronyms that you see up here. If you don't know the acronyms yet, that's great. It means you're in the right spot. If you already know the acronyms, well, hopefully you can learn some new things, new cool things about how the acronyms work together and how you can use these specific open source mediums to improve your threat management process or your vulnerability management process at your company. So, now, every story has its genesis and every king has its ruler, and in the realm of vulnerability management, CVE has been the reigning kingpin for decades. If this is the first time hearing of CVEs, just be warned, these little alphanumerical strings have ruined so many people's weekends and caused countless hours of overtime. So they should be rightly feared, but they're not the worst thing in the world. And at its core, CVE, and this is where you guys are going to find out that this is indeed a beginner's course because I'm telling you what CVE means. CVE stands for Common Weaknesses and Exposures. It is a standard identifier that is used throughout the security industry and the tech industry to enumerate known cybersecurity vulnerabilities. You can think of it this way, right? Back at Big Old Damn Co., back to our analogy, we have a whole bunch of cracks in our dam. We want to make sure that we're identifying them the same way every single time we talk about them. And so we're going to put a unique identifying tag on them. This makes sure that everybody involved in the process, from the dam repair crew all the way down to the village's water maintenance team, is talking about the same thing. Furthermore, this is going to make sure that the issues that we are talking about have been validated, publicly discussed, and acknowledged by the team that has produced the vulnerabilities. You'll see CVEs in the format up here on the screen. It says CVE-year-serial number. As you can assume, the CVE-year, that's the year that the CVE was issued. And then the serial number ranges anywhere from 4 up until they run out of numbers for the year. And those are systematically reserved or assigned to different companies as they require publishing CVEs. MITRE has been the primary source for publishing CVEs, at least they were historically. Nowadays, there's multiple different naming authorities. If you work for a large company, you'll know, right, that they're a naming authority and can issue their own CVEs, people like Microsoft. If you work for a smaller company like me, and I would assume a lot of the people here, you are going to get your CVEs either issued through a public vulnerability platform like VulnChecker, who can talk to MITRE for you, or you're going to reach out to MITRE yourself. I will say, if you're trying to get CVEs issued through MITRE, just be really persistent because they are very busy, and just make sure you're persistent. But so, CVEs are referenced in multiple reports. You'll find them anywhere from hacker news sites all the way to your more mainstream CTI tools or cybersecurity threat intelligence tools. But they always are going to be issued and coming from and stored on CVE.org. So if you're trying to query them, best place to start is CVE.org. Now, this is what a CVE report from MITRE is going to look like. There is a minimum amount of information that they require when they publish CVEs. And this vulnerability right here pretty much has the minimum. So you're going to see the name at the top, and then you will see a description of the vulnerability. That is generally either provided by the company that is producing the vulnerable software or by a security researcher who has discovered it, just depending on who reached out to MITRE first. And then there will be references. You're, at minimum, have to have those three. MITRE will not publish unless there has been a bulletin or some other acknowledgement outside of their platform discussing the vulnerability, because CVE does have some limitations, and it's really important to know what the CVE is supposed to do and what it doesn't do for you. So the CVE program is not a complete solution or a security bulletin. It is an identifier and nothing more. And it's a tool that we use to be able to pull information from everybody else's sources and try to standardize a way to identify what we're talking about. That means that a CVE alone isn't going to tell you how severe the leak is. You're not going to know, for example, in our dam analogy, if it is just a tiny pinhole or if it's a massive leak that's going to take out a road and require your CISO to reactivate his LinkedIn page. It also does not provide technical details about how to fix the issues. That is something that is going to have to come from the security bulletins from the vendors. So at this point, in this process, CVE tells us what we're dealing with. It's used to tag the specific vulnerability, but it doesn't tell us the rating. And that is where CVSS and EPSS comes in and is beneficial. So CVSS stands for the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. If in our analogy, the CVE is the tag that we use, then the CVSS is going to be the vendor agnostic measuring tool that tells us how severe the fallout of a potential breach is going to be. Let's see. So, here. Pretend you guys didn't see that page. That's a surprise. Okay. So the score is numerical. It is going to range from 0.0 to 10.0. And that score is assigned using a wonderful wizardry that they have behind the scenes that looks at the base metrics, such as the attack vector. That's how close an attacker needs to be. Do they need to be on the physical network? Do they need physical access to the system? As well as the potential impact. And that means, what are the consequences? Is it going to be a potential low impact? Is it going to impact the confidentiality or the availability of the information, so on and so forth? On top of your base metrics, you then bring in temporal metrics. These are things about your CVSS that are going to change over time. For example, if there's been a patch released, or if exploit code and scripts have become widely available to malicious actors, you are going to have an increase in your temporal score, and that will ultimately increase your final score. And the last one, the environmental metrics, this is intended for the security engineers, security analysts working at the companies where the vulnerable software is deployed. There's parts of your environment that you know better than the vendor. For example, if you have very sensitive data that's being protected, you are going to score it higher on the temporal score, and that is going to increase the CVSS final score for the vulnerability within your specific environment. CVSS is managed by FIRST as well as by NIST. The latter has a wonderful calculator that you can see right here that will do all the wizardry for you and then give you a tag that you can put in your reports. It's very beneficial. Now, while CVSS is essential for determining the potential severity of a breach or the severity of a vulnerability or an exposure, it does not tell you the likelihood that somebody is actually going to reach out and try and use it. And that's what brings us to EPSS, which stands for our Exploit Prediction Scoring System. It's like the brother to CVSS, but whereas CVSS tells us how severe the vulnerability could be, should it be exploited, EPSS tells us how likely it is that somebody's going to actually try and use that vulnerability against your system. And so EPSS is managed by FIRST, which stands for the Forum of Information Security and Response Teams. And they present scores from a range of 0 to 100% as decimals. So for example, if we have a score of 0.95, that tells us that there is a 95% chance that somebody will try to use this against a web server or whatever in the wild within the next 30 days. The benefits to using EPSS, as I'm sure you guys can kind of already figure out, it is going to make it so that you are identifying and focusing on vulnerabilities that have a higher likelihood of actually being used. So let's say we've got a 9.8 on a CVSS. That is a critical that looks really, really bad on paper. But if it only has an EPSS score of, say, 0.25, because it's very complicated, very difficult to figure out how to even get to the point of exploit, it is going to weigh lower in terms of your internal remediation process compared to something that scores a 0.95 on your EPSS. And again, that is just another great tool that helps you narrow in on the CVEs that require the most attention first, rather than wandering around and looking at others. So once we've tagged our vulnerabilities, once we know how severe they are, we then need to be able to find them in our environments. And that is where we get CPEs, which stands for our Common Platform Enumerations. These things are wonderful. They take everything that we talk about, all of our language, all of our dialect, and turn it into something that a computer can actually search for, that your scanners can actually identify in your environment. They look like this up here. You have CPE, and then you'll have the part, which is either identified as an A for application, an H for hardware, or an O for operating system, followed by the vendor, the product, the version, the update, the edition, and the language. So over here on the right, we can see that this CPE is representing Mac OS 15.4.1, produced by Apple, and it is an operating system. Now, it's super handy just to be able to look at it and know what it means, but generally you're not pushing CPEs around and using them in common discussion. This is something that you're going to feed into your vulnerability scanner, and it's going to identify in your environment. So the major functions of CPEs, as I've stated, they are like an inventory or a dictionary of everything that exists within, or that could exist within your environment. And so within our analogy, let's say that we found Adobe Aqua Reader, this brand new tool that we put into our dam as a way of keeping track of how much water is moving through it. We find out that Adobe Aqua Reader version 1.1 has a vulnerability in it. Well, we can pull the CPE and we can use that and put it into whatever scanning tool that you prefer to identify where it is, which server it's on, and then we can know where to patch first. So I like to use the example of wandering around aimlessly in the desert trying to find water, and ultimately CPE is the map that's going to guide you there. And hand in hand with CPE, we also have these wonderful things called CWEs. CWEs are for those of us who work in software development, which is where I tend to work, and that is your common weakness enumerations. It is like the OWASP top 10 on steroids. And, when you find out that there's 1,000 more to go with OWASP top 10, that's a little bit frightening, but they are very beneficial. What they do is they provide pretty much a dictionary of every way that you could produce software that's vulnerable. So, for example, we'll skip the example because we're running short on time. I will just say CWEs are phenomenal. I use them every day as I'm going out and talking with engineers. Every time that we receive a report back from our penetration testers, we want to know what the CWE is that they think that they've identified within the code, because we want to know what specific things we need to help our developers improve on, or what vulnerabilities are we repeatedly introducing into our product so that we can train against it and go from being, again, a reactionary defense as we're just told that we have vulnerabilities, to proactively training engineers on things that we know that teams aren't producing as well as they could. Because in the end, all the software engineers want to produce secure code. It just makes life so much easier when code goes out secure out the door. And if we can shift left all the way to the point of training before they are even looking at what they're going to write, we can drastically reduce the issues. And so CWE, also managed by MITRE. You can find them on cwe.mitre.org. And once I relocate my mouse, I will show you guys that this is what the CWE page looks like. You have CWE-20, improper input validation, It has an ID of 20, obviously. It tells you whether or not you should be mapping to it. This one is discouraged. Other ones are encouraged because they're more in-depth. And then the abstraction of it is a class. On this page, as you scroll down, you'll see the description, and then you'll have examples and ways that you can identify it outside of looking at the code and merely looking at how the application is functioning. So we have created our CVEs, which has tagged our issues. We've used CVSS and EPSS to identify the criticality and the probability of them being exploited. We further are able to search for them in our environment, and we can also identify the common weaknesses that are creating the issues to begin with. But there still remains one problem, as we discussed in the beginning. We don't know which ones are actively being used by miscreants to steal data, to steal information or water in our example. And that is where the federal government steps in with CISA's KEV, also known as the Common Exploit Vulnerabilities Catalog, the Known Exploits Vulnerability Catalog. So the KEV is a definitive government-managed catalog of issues that are, or vulnerabilities that are known to be exploited in the wild. It is managed by CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Information Security Agency. And for a lot of federal governments and for a lot of even state governments, they mandate immediate resolution of KEV issues within a given timeline because these are things that are actively being exploited. The KEV is very beneficial because it is going to cut through the noise. Going back to the same analogy I pulled up earlier, if we have a CVE, and that CVE we see has a CVSS score of 6.5, and it has a probability score of 0.95, and then KEV comes out and tells us on top of that that there is proof that it is being used in the wild and it has been used to target federal systems, we can turn around and say that this is absolutely the first thing that we are going to fix because it produces the greatest amount of risk for our environment. And it is primarily for the federal government, but it is open to everybody. And I personally believe that it should be one of the primary things that is being reviewed as new CVEs come out that could affect your environment. Okay, now let's move on to the final section in which we are going to talk about enriched reports. We've gone over this alphabet soup. We know what these different things mean, but honestly, nobody wants to spend their entire day looking at 6 different reports. Nobody wants to try and manage multiple spreadsheets, and that is where enriched reporting comes in. If you guys were able to attend the presentation right before mine, he talked about enriched reporting, and he talked about all the benefits and even provided a script. So I highly recommend that you guys go out and look up the previous presentation once they publish them, as well as look into the NIST National Vulnerability Database. That's another American federal government funded database where they take and they enrich CVEs and they provide details and they make it a lot easier to keep track of what's going on. Your vendor management solutions, as well as your cyber threat intelligence tools, are probably going to have some sort of CVE enrichment in them as well, because those producers are highly motivated to get you as much information as possible in one pane of glass. So the values, again, it saves time, it's going to give you context, and then it is going to prioritize key issues. And you can see here as Palpatine, the difference between CVEs and enriched reports alone. And here, this is from NIST NVD. We see up at the top, you've got your CVSS. Down here, you've got the source. And then we've got the weakness enumeration. We've got the CPE below it telling us where to find it. And as you scroll down, there will be more descriptions and more information provided for you. Now, taking this full circle, we're back to the alphabet soup. Hopefully you guys see this, you recognize it, they're less scary, they're more familiar. You know how they're all going to work together, and you know the benefit of enriched reporting. And so in conclusion, congratulations, we saved Big Old Damco. The leaking reservoir, we've identified everything, we fixed everything, and you guys have been better educated. So final takeaways: use enriched reports, prioritize KEV first, recognize that CVSS and EPSS can be used together and should be, and then try to prevent issues going into your code if you're in a software development position so that you're not shooting yourself in the foot as you put out new code. And that is it. I really appreciate you guys coming out to my presentation today. If you have any questions for me or would like anything from me, you feel free to come up and chat. And I hope you guys have a wonderful time at the rest of the convention. Thank you.